Hi, I'm Godji, and thank you for joining me. Today, I'd like to show you how to enable Azure Log Analytics for the Containerized HPCC Systems platform using Terraform. First, what is Azure Log Analytics? Azure Log Analytics is a tool provided by Microsoft that edits log queries. One log query is collected by Azure Monitor, which is another tool by Microsoft. And it also provides query result. Second, what is Terraform? Terraform is also another tool, but provided by HashiCorp. What it does is that it codifies infrastructures such as compute, storage, network, and it also automates and manages cloud infrastructure. And that could be existing infrastructure or new infrastructure. Next, what do you need to get started? To get started using the logging module that we provide for HPCC logs, you would want to first make sure that you have a running Azure Kubernetes service, you have a valid service principal, you have a log analytics contributor IAM role assignment, and also a code editor. So a service principal is basically it's going to act as a user. It's mainly used where in cases where you do not want to interact with the process. So it's going to handle the authentication for us, and we will give it the log analytics contributor role. So that it can act as a user to get the logs. Next, how do you verify that your Azure Kubernetes service is running? One of the things that you can do is by going to the portal. If you go to the portal and you open your AKS, you can see that whether your AKS is stopped or has been started. Another thing you can also do is by going to your Azure CLI on your console and make sure that all of your pods are also running. So to do that, you can do on AKS get credentials -n followed by your cluster name -g followed by the resource group. The cluster is N. Furthermore, if you would like to verify that HPCC is also running on the cluster, you can also do a kubectl get paths -a. I should also mention that in order to run those commands, you will need to first have the AZ CLI installed on your local machine, as well as the kubectl. The AZ CLI can be installed by going on Azure. It depends on your OS. If you have a Mac, you can probably install it with your boot. If you do a boot install AZ CLI, and to install the kubectl, once you installed the AZ CLI, you can do an AZ AKS install CLI, and that will install the kubectl and as well as kubelogin for you. So how do you deploy the Azure Log Analytics for the Containerized HPCC Systems platform using our login module? So to make it easier for users, we have provided a Terraform module. And that module provides two log solutions. The first one is the Log Analytics workspace, and as well as the Elastic for HPCC. Today, we are going over the Log Analytics solution. And to make use of that module, you can go to github.com/hpcc-systems/terraform-azurerm-hpcc-login. And you can go over the README. After that, you can import it into your own project. So this is an overview of the login module being used within the project. So what we have done here is creating a data directory where we store all of the information that we need, that we get from the login module. Once it is deployed. Next we have also some TFVars files where we set the necessary variables for the module. We have two of those. We have the log_analytics.auto.tfvars as well as the misc.auto.tfvars. So the misc one, we use the misc one to put general to set the general variables such as tags and metadata and the resource group variable. And the log analytics, inside the log analytics TFVars, we have the log analytics variable where we set all of the we have the log analytics object where we set all of the log analytics attributes. And this is an overview of the output that you will get once the module is deployed. So this is a look of the data directory. And there you will have 3 files created. The first one is the HPCC namespace, which contain the HPCC namespace name that was used to deploy the login module. The log access body, which is basically a YAML configuration file that we get from GitHub from the HPCC Systems repo. And that is needed for HPCC. So once we are going to deploy HPCC, we will need to pass that file to the deployment so that HPCC can pass logs. And the last one is the workspace resource ID. And when it comes to workspaces, we have 2 IDs, which should not be confused for one another. This is the workspace resource ID. The other one is the workspace ID. There are 2 different IDs. The workspace resource ID is basically a typical Azure Resource Manager ID, where you have the subscription ID followed by the resource name and so on. But the workspace ID is basically a series of numbers, like a usual ID. Next, we have an overview of the log analytics TFVars file, where we have the Azure Log Analytics workspace object. And in it, we have some attributes such as the name of the workspace, the name that we want to use for the workspace, followed by the internet query enabled, which is basically saying that, okay, I want to enable query over the internet, so I can query logs over the internet, and that must be set to true. And we have also the internet ingestions enabled, whether we want to ingest logs over the internet. and that also should be must be set to true. And also there is a tag attribute in there where you can set your tags. And after that, after the Azure Log Analytics workspace object, we have another object which is responsible for the authentication part. Earlier, we mentioned having a service principal, which is necessary for the log analytics workspace. So what we are going to do with that service principal is that we need to create a secret, a Kubernetes secret. And to create that secret, we need to pass those attributes to the login module. So we have the client ID of the service principal. We have the client secret, which is basically the secret of the service principal. We have the principal ID, which can be found by running AZSP, I believe, AZSP list. And if you can also query your specific service principal, or you can grab that and then look for the principal ID. And last, we have the tenant ID, which is basically your subscription ID, your Azure subscription ID. And this is an overview of the output, how we output the information that we need from the login module. We have three outputs that we output on the console once the login module is deployed. And those are the same outputs that we stored in files on the data directory that we showed you earlier. The first one is the log access body, which is the YAML configuration that we are going to pass to the HPCC deployment. The second one is the workspace resource ID, which is different from workspace ID. And that ID will be passed to the AKS deployment, to the OMS agent. And the third one is the workspace ID. The workspace ID is not being used. It's not going to be used in either the AKS deployment or the HPCC deployment. So we just output that so that you can see the difference between the workspace ID and the workspace resource ID. The resource local file, the local files are the resources that we use to store the information that we need from the login module. And you can see we have two of those. One of them is the log access body, where we store the log access body YAML configuration once we pull it from GitHub. And the second one is the workspace resource ID. We also have another one for the namespace that is not being shown on this screenshot. Next, so what comes after deploying Azure Log Analytics? So after you deploy the login module, you have two more things to do. The first one is enabling the Azure Log Analytics on the Azure Kubernetes service. And the second one is to enable the Azure Log Analytics on the Containerized HPCC Systems platform deployment. So how do you enable log analytics on the AKS or the Azure Kubernetes service? To do that, if you're using, you will be using an AKS module, a Terraform module. So in there, you will have something similar to that, to this object experimental, where you can enable the OMS agent. So once the OMS agent is enabled, you will pass the OMS agent log analytics workspace resource ID to the OMS agent, and that will enable the log analytics on the AKS. As you can see here on the screenshot, we first verify that the workspace resource ID file that we stored under the data directory in our project actually exists. So once we verify that the file exists, then we refer that file to the workspace, to the OMS agent log analytics workspace ID attribute. And if that file does not exist, then we verify that the user, whether the user provides that ID or not. So if the user does not provide the ID, and the ID and that file, the workspace resource ID file is not does not exist under the data directory, then we set that to null. So that once set to null, then the Azure Log Analytics is not going to be enabled on the AKS. So once again, in order to enable the log analytics on the AKS, you need to pass the workspace resource ID to the AKS deployment and then do an apply. So as you might already figure out is that you need to first have your AKS running and then deploy the login module and then come back to the AKS to enable the log analytics on the AKS. So that is that's two applies for the AKS. So you're going to first deploy it and then deploy login and then come back and then do another apply to enable log analytics. So next, so how do you enable the log analytics on the HPCC? To enable the log analytics on the Containerized HPCC Systems platform, you need to pass the log access body to the HPCC deployment. And the best way to do that, if you are using Terraform, which we are doing, is to pass that file to the values attribute inside the ham release resource. So that works similarly to kubectl apply -f, and then followed by the log access body YAML file. So that will apply that configuration file to the HPCC deployment. And another thing I should also mention is that the namespace that we used in the log access and in the login module must be the same namespace that must be used for the HPCC deployment. So all of the HPCC paths, basically the HPCC deployment, should be within the same namespace as the log analytics. So you have to either, if you already have the HPCC deployed and you want to use the login module to enable logs, you have to take that same namespace and pass it to the login module. And if you haven't deployed the HPCC and you choose a namespace for the login module, and that namespace must be the same namespace you have to use for the HPCC deployment. So here's a demo on the configuration for the Azure Log Analytics login module. So first, we are going to get an overview of everything that's and this is within our project. This is everything that we have configured. And this will be available on our HPCC Systems account as Terraform Azure HPCC examples. And yeah, that will be part of our HPCC examples project that we are going to make available on our account, on our GitHub account. So this is an example of the MISC TFVARS file where we set the owner tags, which basically is my name and email, and then followed by the metadata object where we pass some basic metadata and also tags, followed by location, and also the HPCC object where we pass the namespace prefix or the namespace name. We have also the HPCC version that we intend to deploy, and that version will be used to pull the log access file from GitHub, because that is also version controlled. So we need to pass the version so that we can get the correct version of that file. And then followed by the create namespace. The create namespace is used to whether we want the login module to create a new namespace for us or not. So in case where you have HPCC already deployed, you want to set that to false because you would already have a namespace created by the HPCC deployment. In that case, that will be false. In case where you don't have the HPCC deployed, you can set that to true, and that the login module will create a new namespace for you. And that namespace name should be passed to the HPCC deployment. So next we have another demo where we are going to enable the log analytics on the AKS. So after deploying the login module, we are going to enable the log analytics on the AKS. And once we set that to true, that will enable the log analytics on the AKS for us. This is still our project. This is how we configure it, and yours might look different. So the first one is to enable the OMS agent. And once that is enabled, we pass the Azure Log Analytics Workspace resource ID to the OMS agent. And then after we do that, after that we want the Terraform apply, which will apply the change to our AKS deployment. And that should effectively enable Azure Log Analytics on the AKS. Next, we have another demo where we show how to enable the Azure Log Analytics on the Containerized HPCC Systems platform deployment. So this is our HPCC module that we are using within our project. And this is how we pass the log access body to the deployment as a values file. So it is again similar to kubectl apply -f. So what we basically do here is uh, is um, verify that the log access configuration file is available or exist under the data directory. And then once that is verified, we pass that file to the deployment. And if that file does not exist, we set that to null, and that will not enable log analytics on the HPCC. Last, we have a demo of how to verify how to verify the log analytics is enabled on the HPCC deployment. And to do that, you can go on ECL Watch and verify that you can see the logs. So once on ECL Watch, you click on that and then the logs, and that should propagate the logs for you. Here we go. Here are the logs. So that means once you can see the logs, that means that the log analytics is enabled on the HPCC systems platform. And on that page, you can also filter the logs. You can choose to filter them by container name or job ID, thread, process ID, date, class, or audience, whichever you want. So this was an overview on how to enable Azure Log Analytics for the Containerized HPCC Systems platform. And I would like to thank you for joining me today, and have a good day.